everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. And today we are going back to basics, back to school. Because no matter how far along we think we are in our psychic development or spiritual development, it's always important to go back to the basics and just get that refresher of the foundation. So today I'm going to be sharing with you 3 of my top tips for your spiritual development process, okay? In general, spiritual development is very disorienting and confusing for a lot of people. I think we enter into spiritual development thinking that we're going to heal ourselves and change our life, and that definitely happens, and that's a major part of this. But there's also a part of spiritual awakening, psychic development, spiritual development, initiation, where it can become very confusing. You can become very disoriented. And so when that happens, it's good to just be able to talk about, you know, what's okay, what's normal, and why or do certain things go on. So that's what this video is all about, and we're gonna start with the first thing that is normal in spiritual development, and that is life changes. So the moment that you start a meditation practice, and by the way, this practice could be 5 minutes a day. This practice could be 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night. This practice could be just stopping a little bit every day to watch your breath and to just check in and see if you're in your heart, to see if you're in alignment, you know. That's a spiritual practice. A spiritual practice does not have to be some huge ceremonial thing. No. A spiritual practice can be a really little thing that you do, like just checking in throughout how you're feeling throughout the day, and that actually can make the biggest difference in your life. It's crazy how that works. But it's the smallest little attunements that create sometimes the biggest changes, but if they're done regularly, that actually gives you massive change in your life. So keep in mind with change that you're going to change. I think that a lot of people may think that when they take on spiritual development, that certain aspects of their life will stay the same, how they like it. But then just these aspects of their life that they want to change will change. And so sometimes when we're going through our spiritual awakening, we think that we can kind of control where that energy goes. And this is not the case. And I know so many of you watching this are probably like, yeah, no, yeah, this happened to me. But when you develop yourself personally, so when you're sitting down and you're meditating, when you're reading spiritual literature, when you're watching spiritual videos, it's like you're charging yourself. You know, you're preparing yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, through breath and relaxing your nervous system and all of that, to literally be feeling that spiritual energy within yourself. And once you start to light that fire, that spiritual energy, that kundalini force is intelligent. That Christ consciousness force within you is intelligent, and it will start going throughout your being, throughout your mind, throughout your emotional body, your pain body, you know, even your physical body. And it will start to heal and clear out what is no longer resonant. And so this is one of the main reasons why people stop spiritual development, is they don't have the right expectations. And they think that spiritual development or psychic abilities are like an accessory, like as though you can develop clairvoyance or claircognizance or some spiritual ability, and it can just kind of be tacked on to your life the way that it is now. And in reality and in traditional spiritual teachings, all psychic abilities, which are sometimes called siddhis, in the Eastern traditions, they are earned. And they're usually earned through sacrifice, through having to sacrifice your negative ego, through having to get rid of something within yourself that is impure, that is out of alignment, that is not in line with your highest truth. And so the moment that we begin to spiritually develop, we begin to purify. And the more that we purify, the better container or vessel we become to carry Christ consciousness. And that's what makes us this incredible, clear magnet for spiritual insight, for very high spiritual beings to communicate with us. It's like the purification of ourself, and with that, the developing of real character, of a real ethical character, and of a perhaps a different personality than you had when you began. And so a lot of people do not realize that when they start spiritual development, that they may begin to see things in their life that really are unhealthy. It may be a relationship. It may be a friendship. It may be a partner, a romantic partner. It may be your job. It may be, you may become aware through your spiritual development and your inner sight that you're doing something to yourself that is unloving. You, with your sight that you're developing through your work, through your meditation, through all of that, you may look out into the world and you may say, wow, the world is a very upside down place. And you may begin to see patterns in the world, in the collective, that are very unhealthy. You may begin to see the shadow of the world, the evil of the world, the good of the world as well. You'll begin to see that too. But we don't get to see the good without also seeing the bad. We can't genuinely understand higher consciousness until we also understand what impurities there are as well. So all of this is part of psychic development. It is higher sight. It is more sensitivity. It's deeper sensitivity. It's more information. We don't get to tell ourselves as we're developing what kind of information that we want to get with this exercise. You know, we have to open to our higher self, to our inner Christ essence, and allow our true self to come forward. The self that we've been too afraid to become, the self that we have hidden because we've thought it was weird or silly or whatever it is, or doesn't have a place in this world. That is the part of us that has to be born to become more. And that is the part of you that will develop as you begin to develop your psychic abilities, as you begin to spiritually develop. That is what that is. That is how succinct our development is that we don't have to try to even necessarily figure out who we are. Who we are will just start to come forward and reveal itself to us, and we will remember, right? So that is what spiritual development is. That is how psychic powers are acquired. And there is no spiritual development without life changes. And so if you enter into a spiritual development program, you know, even if you're watching spiritual development videos on YouTube, you got to know that. You got to know that it's serious. And it's serious, but it is also the most important work that you'll do in your life, and it is why you came here. Okay, so tip number 1, the more you spiritually develop, the more you develop your intuition, the more your life is going to change. And you may not recognize yourself after 10 years, after 5 years, after a few months. It's different for everybody. But you will change. And you may change in ways that you could never imagine, because sometimes our linear mind can't grasp our own potential. Oftentimes too, because we haven't seen it in the world. And so if we haven't seen a good example in the world, then we often can't conceptualize our own power or our own identity. But with spiritual development, it is revealed to you. And through spiritual training, you become intimately aware of it as an inner essence. And it begins to radiate from you. And then you begin to embody and remember who you are. Who you are in your deepest truth and in your deepest power. So in that sense as well, psychic development, spiritual development, it's really just how we can live our life properly and in alignment with who we truly are. And that's actually also what creates a more meaningful society if everybody has the courage to do this. Okay, so the next thing that you can expect if you're developing yourself is physical symptoms. So one thing that can throw people off is how you can engage in what seems like a pretty benign practice like meditation, even reading certain spiritual literature that is just has a way of working on your whole being. You can have physical sensations, you can have physical pains, you can feel very weird in your mind, you can just have real, tangible physical experiences that are not rooted in like being touched or anything to do with the physical plane. You can literally have physical symptoms that are driven through spiritual awakening. And this is because if you were to clairvoyantly look at yourself, you would actually see and complete enmeshing with the higher worlds and also with higher beings or angels or your guides. You would see no difference between your consciousness and the higher worlds, or your consciousness and your angel's consciousness. Everything is actually interlaced and enmeshed as we get less and less and less dense. This physical form is just the most dense form we have. But we have an etheric body, which is kind of like an energy body that is keeping our physical form in place. And then we also have an astral body, which is linked into the etheric body, that is kind of like your star body. Astral means star. And this is our Stargate body or our traveling body. And this is where when we dream or we enter the astral plane or we start doing spiritual work, it's the astral body that leaves the etheric body and the physical body and goes off and does a little thing. It stays connected with a cord, but it is the thing that goes off and do and goes off the different places and sees all the different things. So it's just different bodies, and even these bodies are permeable to spiritual guides, which can enter into these bodies and speak to us through enmeshment. And so obviously, if there is no real barrier between our physical self and the higher worlds and higher beings, then if we start to develop ourselves spiritually, we can get some physical symptoms. You know, you can get some real feelings that come from that kind of stuff. And this has always been, you know, in the Eastern tradition too, people talk about Kundalini awakening. Kundalini awakening now is turned into ascension symptoms, and some other New Age language around it, but it's basically the same thing. It's all also based around glands. So we have different glandular, we each have a glandular system. The male glandular system is significantly different than the female glandular system. They're fundamentally different, and they deal with energy in a very different way. So it's important in genuine study of esoterica to differentiate between the male system and the female system. The glandular system is different. The system of connection is different, okay? But as soon as we go through puberty, our psychic glands start to get going, and the psychic glands are also the sex hormone gland. The sex glands, they're also responsible for our puberty and our sexual maturity. So it's as soon as that starts happening, people can suddenly become interested in spirituality. People's psychic gifts can start coming on around the time of puberty. I don't know how many other young girls out there played light as a feather, stiff as a board, and ran around in the forest and thought they were a witch, but I certainly did. So there's something that happens to us when we start entering into puberty. There's a real chance that you can start to redevelop some spiritual abilities. Some people have it from birth, other people get it later on. It's not always the same, but there is an association with the spiritual bodies interlacing with the glandular system and hormones and all of that. So everything really is interconnected. And also our nervous system connects to very real spiritual channels that are called nadis in the Eastern tradition. N-A-D-I-S, nadis. And so these are basically like, you know, lesser spiritual channels, or the channels in which energy runs through, higher energy runs through. And we have to actually train ourselves as mystics to be able to enmesh with higher spiritual forces, high spiritual masters or beings, and not have it damage our nervous system, not have it damage the bodies. Because when you're when you're training to be able to contain all of this energy, you have to be able to stabilize yourself, and you have to be able to go through various different sort of processes to be able to carry that. And if you're not doing that properly, you can experience very real psychic burnout. Even if you are doing it properly, it's very easy to experience psychic burnout, which is a very real physical symptom of tiredness and exhaustion. It can even cause brain fog. It can cause the inability to access certain levels of information that you had access prior to, so you can get certain psychic blocks, all because you're burning the candle at both ends, and your development can be not balanced enough. And so that can cause very real physical symptoms for the mystic, or even if you're just doing spiritual development. You know, if you come into energies too soon or too fast, that can cause real physical effects in your body. And a lot of people won't necessarily associate physical symptoms with a spiritual cause, because I think that we have this idea in our head that, like, if it's a spiritual thing, it'll only be observed on the spiritual plane. But in reality, there really is no difference between the planes, especially for a human being. We are all of the planes. And so keep that in mind. And one more really interesting thing actually about spiritual development and perceiving entities or different worlds, you can begin to really see things, to really hear things, It's very common when you first begin your intuition development journey to see things out of the corner of your eye. But then the moment that you like look over there at what that was, then you can't see it, and you're back in the third dimension again. So periphery vision has always been traditionally actually a psychic technique. I don't know if anybody realizes this or knows this, but various different mystics used to divine this way, where they would sort of lightly fix their eyes ahead, but then they'd really be watching someone from the periphery, or they would walk into a busy area or walk somewhere, and they would be walking normally and looking ahead, but they're actually kind of just gently paying attention to what's beside them and seeing what their subconscious mind would pull from the sides, from their peripheral vision, because the idea was that if the eyes and mind are focused forward, then what is at the side is more coming from a spiritual place or a subconscious place, or more of a divining place, rather than your conscious mind, which is forward. So it was kind of like a way of focusing your vision forward in the third dimension, but understanding that because you're focused forward, that whatever appears here may be from somewhere else. It's sort of like, this is like the divining space. And I remember also reading that Rudolf Steiner used to do this. He would have someone come into his studio, and then he would be sitting, and then he would watch someone come in the studio, and he would actually observe that person with his periphery vision, not with his eyes. Because once you look at something with your eyes, it automatically can tune it to the 3D plane and our agreed upon laws. But if you're looking here and just slightly looking there, there's that ability for it to just not quite be in focus. And it can be a little bit of a scrying technique. And so he used to actually have people come into his office, and then he would look at them from the periphery, and then he could get information, and he could see the person's astrological sign and everything about their life. And so that was actually something that he used to do. And this was also an old technique that I had researched a long time ago when I was making my Inner Mystic course. I became very interested in psychic history and the old development techniques, like the old traditional development techniques. And so this was one of them, is this periphery thing. And so it actually happens to you naturally. The more that you develop yourself, you'll notice that you will see things out of the corner of your eye. I used to always like see things like peering around a corner at me. I think I've talked about this on my private live streams, where like sometimes I would see like something like peeking around. I think that's kind of a common one, though it is unusual. And you'll also potentially start to hear things. Some people are very clairaudient, and that's really how things come online for them, is with the hearing. And then some people will get also strange sensations on their face and body, buzzing in the ears, because there's a frequency shift in the room. There's a legitimate energy shift in the room, and your ears will pick that up because it's a pressure change. That's how it's perceived. So these are all different kinds of very real physical symptoms that you will begin to have when you engage in spiritual development. And the last thing I will say about physical symptoms and physical manifestations is that there is a way in which your guides or your higher self will work with you. And it's like this. They will give you an experience, okay? It may not be, and probably won't be, your dream experience, or something that you are expecting, or something that you want, or something that's like something that someone else's experience. Is going to be an experience that is meaningful for you individually. So it could be a sound, okay? It could be the feeling, it could be a certain feeling, or knowing. It could be some kind of vision, but it will break your boundaries. So it will push you a little bit. And then your spirit guides will see how you respond. Okay, so they'll give you a spiritual experience through one of your clairs usually, and they're going to see how you respond. Because we can pray all day and we can be like, I want to be a super psychic. I want to see all the visions. I want to feel all the things. I want to be looking into the future. I want to be looking into the past. I want the psychic, the things, you know. And then when we actually experience those things, it's so deep and it's so personal and it's so shocking that we can actually reject them. And we can actually reject our development. And sometimes this rejection of spiritual connection with angels, with our guides, not even lower things, which is another story in another video, but genuine contact with your higher self or angels. You know, you can reject that just because it is so out of the 3D paradigm that it is shocking to you, and that shock is an instinct. It's not even something that you consciously can control. And so what will happen is your spirit guides will bring you into an experience like that, and then they'll see how you react. And if you become so frightened and so resistant to that experience, then your development will stay sort of at the same level, and it'll be there for a while until they'll try the process again. And so this is sort of another like unspoken aspect of spiritual development, which is that you will be tested as you go to see what you can handle. And if an experience gives you too much stress, then you won't move on to the next phase. This is why in traditional mystery training, in traditional spiritual training and teaching, building up peace in the body and holy emotions in the body is the most important thing. And a lot of other stuff doesn't even happen until that can be done to a certain degree. Because if that does not happen, when you do have an experience, you're not lucid enough to actually respond properly to it. Because everything that is spiritual development is like a fantasy. It's like what you think it is. It's what you think it's going to be, what you want it to be, but it's not actually entering into the experience as it is. To do that, you have to train your emotional body. You have to train your mind and train your nervous system, because these experiences are shocking instinctually. So be aware of that process. You know, be aware of how this development process works, so that when you do experience these tests and these initiations, you can respond properly. And just so you guys know, I am actually going to be teaching again on this in the fall, and I'm going to be going very deep with this. And if you want to join that live, I will leave a link in the description below so you can be on this development journey with me. I also have some other courses available that are very foundational in my shop on my website. So if this really interests you, go ahead and check those out as well. But I am going to be lecturing on these topics in depth for the fall. So keep that in mind and go ahead and sign up if you're interested in participating with that. Okay, so the last thing that you have to keep in mind if you're on a spiritual development journey is something called the dark night of the soul. Now, the dark night of the soul visits everyone. And it's really about making it through. But there's one thing about the dark night of the soul that everybody should know. And that the dark night of the soul is actually a sign of progress. When we experience this dark night of the soul, we're not experiencing who we truly are. And if you are in a dark night of the soul, if you are in your depths, what you're feeling, that pain, that depression, that anxiety, the negative thoughts, the spiraling, that is not who you truly are. What you are experiencing is that energy leaving you, trying to leave you. And so when you go through personal development, okay, when you're evolving in your journey, you will go through periods of darkness. But that darkness is coming forward because you are evolving, not because that's who you are. It's what is leaving you. And you have to know that. It's a purification process. And so sometimes it can be so intense that the technique really isn't to try to change the energy. It's not trying to transmute it, because the energy sometimes is not at a place where it can turn into something else entirely. And a lot of people really get caught up on this because they really want control over their emotions and over their emotional body and over their feelings. But we're not really here to control. We're here to align, and we're here to feel, we're here to listen, and we're here to understand, okay? And so there's certain phases of the dark night of the soul where what you want to do is you want to understand that principle that this is not who you are. This is what is leaving you. All right, because the more you spiral, the more you believe it, the more you engage with it, the more that you fight it, the more it's kind of like you're affirming it or you're believing it, right? So there is that point with shadow where it's not ready to leave yet, and you have to be able to sit with it in peace. And you're not trying to change it into something else. You're certainly not trying to change it into joy, because I think that would probably cause madness, you know? That's a misnomer of you know, a misunderstanding. But what you are doing is you're allowing it to work. And you're allowing it to move through you, and you're understanding it's not who you are. And you know that this too will pass, and the sun will rise, and a new season will come. And it is the even temperament, the stillness, and the inward pause, and the ability to carry out a routine while this emptiness is around you and in you, that builds character, that builds strength. And that makes it so when it comes back again, it's less and less and less and less. So again, it's about it being okay that you don't feel great, and not thinking that it makes you a horrible person, or that it makes you weak, or that it makes you anything less than a being of Christ consciousness that you are. And sometimes when the dark night of the soul comes on, it's like you don't feel connected to anything and anyone, and that can be very scary. But what's happening is that when you're going to come out of the dark night of the soul, which you will evolve out of, what's happening is something new is going to be introduced to you. Something new is going to be born through that darkness, through that dark experience. It's just like how when you're in the womb, all you hear are muffled noises, and you know, you can just kind of sense things. But then when you're born, you're in a new world. And so that is kind of that darkness and the rebirth space that we have to be okay to be in that. And sometimes it's like you can't hear anything, you can't see anything, and there's no joy, there's no light. But it's because another light is coming, and it's different. And in a way, you're just learning to sense it. And this is one of the biggest tricks too with that, is that sometimes we go into these darker, like blank spaces, and the real thing is to just turn inward and sort of notice or try to feel our Christ consciousness within us, or to just know it's there. And be okay if you don't necessarily feel it radiating back to us, to do it anyway. And when you do this, you're literally forging new ground within yourself. Because sometimes when we go into the dark night of the soul, it's kind of like a place we've never been before. And it's an opportunity to not force yourself to necessarily like feel better or be perfect, but to just be completely still and neutral, and to watch what arises. And it's actually the ability to be with yourself in non-judgment, in non-panic, and let the mind go, and just to be in that nothing space that creates the most powerful spiritual minds. Because so many people only want to meditate or go inward when it feels good, and when they can feel that sensation, when they can feel love. But I think that we are really defined by our ability to also be able to sit in times that don't feel so good. And sometimes when we can transform them, we can do that, but sometimes when they're not so easily transformed, to be able to just to be able to just kind of open the heart and be. And that is sort of what the lesson of the dark night of the soul is. And so when you're in that dark night of the soul, you're feeling the contrast of who you are becoming and who you were. And it's this blank space between who you are becoming and who you were, right? And so don't panic, it will pass. And it is a major part of spiritual development. And it's like in the Eastern tradition how one of the most prized techniques and understanding was to not try to be super, super, super exalted and happy and in ecstasy and really enthusiastic and high in your demeanor, you know, just totally high in your mood. And then also not going super low, but to really develop within yourself what that middle line is, what that peace is. And to really get good at training the emotional body by slowly, slowly building up emotions and then washing them over with peace. And get really good at generating different holy emotions yourself, generating peace yourself, generating feelings of appreciation. In my Inner Mystic first module of my series, we talk about cultivating the feeling of awe, and how cultivating the feeling of awe is very important for spiritual development and reverence. And so when we can begin to very gently but very deeply develop holy emotions, peace, appreciation, warmth, neutrality, but just that warmth of Christ consciousness within us. We practice building these emotions up within us from scratch, from nothing, for no reason at all other than to worship, other than to be with ourselves with these holy emotions. When we do that, we do make our life easier, because we have created this inner light. This is the divine feminine energy. This is the yin teaching, is the development of the emotional body and letting it fill you and develop to a certain degree that you become magnetic, and you can develop your own magnetism. And this allows you to enter into a lot of situations in a sovereign way. Because when we build our whole world on what other people think about us, what other people want us to be, that we will never be. When we try to get all of our energy from social media, from likes on social media, we try to build a sense of self on external things, we suffer. The only thing that will bring genuine love and peace into your system is turning inward and sensing the radiance of Christ within you that is there right now. You were born with it. To sense that. And to build it, not in a huge way, but to build it like a little flame, like an inner light. And that is who you truly are. And that is the light that will transform you. That is the light that will allow you to move through dark nights of the soul with grace. Because the reason why we often go through darkness and confusion is because we're identifying with the external world. And we're expecting any energy from the external world, people's ideas, people's thoughts, what's cool, what's trendy. That will never nourish you. That will never nourish you. You will always be searching, and you will come into periods of mourning and darkness because deep down you know that looking for yourself in the external world that is crazy you'll never find yourself. So when we have a practice of finding ourselves now, of finding ourselves today, of developing our holy emotions, love, peace, neutrality as a velvet inside of us, as silk inside of us, we begin to interact with the world in a whole new way. Our life changes and our experience changes. This is so, so, so important. Okay? So that's all I have for you today. You know, spiritual development and psychic development can cause major changes in your life. And you may come into it thinking that I'm just gonna develop my third eye and I'm just gonna see all the things and whatever, but then you may end up becoming an amazing clairsentient and be able to feel things that you never thought you could. And so when you come into the spiritual development, you've got to know that it's a journey that will surprise you and will change your life and challenge you, but at the end of it, you will become more of yourself, which is whenever we get sad, it's because we're missing ourselves. And so this ability, the spiritual development journey that we're on is innately self-development. It's innately change, and you have to know that going in. Otherwise, you may turn your back on your spiritual journey the moment that things get hard. You'll experience very real physical symptoms. You'll begin to see things in the physical world, potentially hear things, and your barrier will be broken. And you know, we have very real different psychic channels in our body, our glands, all of that can lead us to actually physically experiencing in a very real way the spiritual world. And these weird experiences will challenge you. And if you get too freaked out, if it causes you too much anxiety, too much stress, you can't deal with another reality being enmeshed on top of this one, you can't deal with more vision, then your development process will slow, and that's okay too. But it is the ability to train every day inwardly that allows you to blend your inner worlds in such a way that when they start blending in the outer world, it's okay. It doesn't shock you. You're already aware of so much. Okay? And the dark night of the soul. Know what it is. It's not who you are, it's what is leaving you. Develop your inner light every day through saturating your system with holy emotions, actually feeling and developing feelings of love in your system, in your nervous system. This is going to actually help you be able to create sensations in your being during dark nights of the soul, or during times. It's like a system you can kind of switch on. So you're not depending on the external world to constantly make your mood. And I think, you know, it's easy to say that we don't care about what other people think or about what's going on in the world or whatever, but it's how we're raised. It's part of our society to be totally focused on the external plane and materiality. So we do have to kind of train ourselves out of it, and that's okay, but we just have to know that that's the path. So thank you everyone so much for joining me today. It's been my absolute pleasure to connect with you. If this information is valuable to you, I will be teaching this fall very deeply into spiritual development, psychic development. It's going to be different levels. It's going to be lecture series, workshops, and I really look forward to connecting with you. If you want to be there, go ahead and you can pre-sign up or sign up for my newsletter so you can be notified when the course is available. I'd love to have you there live with me so I can do my lecture, and then I can take your questions at the end and you can be part of the whole process with me. I'd love to have that. I'd love to have you there. If you can't make it, obviously the lectures will be available in the course section of my website as well. So without further ado, as always, all my love your way, and I will see you in my next video.